You know what? I think he'll be okay. Blight Survival is an upcoming medieval 4-player co-op game, and I, for one, cannot wait. We got this vertical slice over a year ago now, and it already blew up to 3.6 million views on the IGN channel. That's not even talking about the tens of millions of views that came from other YouTubers talking about it, and of course reposts of that initial video. This was the thing that took people by storm, because don't get me wrong, we're all absolute basement-dwelling cretins that love medieval shit. But when it comes to something like this, where it's a new concept from a new studio that nobody has heard before, people do start to get a little bit excited, because we're done with the old things of AAA studios bringing out these games of very mainstream and, granted, saturated markets. Modern Warfare, even World War II to some extent. Don't get me started on goddamn Roblox. I know some of you out there play it. You need to get help. I'm here if you need anything. So a 4-player co-op set in this medieval world with realistic gore, apart from the zombies, and enhanced combat that is saying to be a mix between Dark Souls and Mordhau. But we'll get onto that in a little bit. When this trailer came out, 2 people were stated to be on the development team. A development team called Hanir Studios.
That's it. That painted armor. Bloody savages, didn't I say?
Yeah, you said it, Grinder.
Mads Christensen wanted to start and try something a little bit different on the Unreal Engine 5, an engine that is famous for creating some of the most beautiful games ever, and this was paramount to their development. You see, with a small budget and a smaller studio, being able to easily access things like blueprints, which is the way the Unreal Engine 5 functions, and of course the famous Quixel library, if anyone doesn't know, there's plenty of videos showing you how to use this stuff. I've dabbled with it in the past, and it can create some of the most gorgeous terrain so easily. You don't even have to be a AAA studio to get stuff that looks this good anymore. Not to mention all the very easily accessible assets that sometimes people turn their nose up, saying everything has to be made from nothing. However, if you're a small studio, this stuff can be lifesavers, and you can create some of the most beautiful environments possible. What we saw last year on IGN and GameSpot when they released it was definitely a vertical slice, and the developers admit this. It was a small section, worked as a demo to try and drum up some enthusiasm, trying to get some investors or backing behind it, and that very much beloved promotion. The team was just 2 people, but I think they wanted to grow it to try and create this as more of a mainstream thing, as it started as a side project. This PvE medieval co-op survival needed to have that extra flair, and that's what Unreal Engine 5 gave them. The whole purpose of this game is set in this post-apocalyptic medieval world. There is a virus that's been going around, these spores that are taking and infesting humans. You have to try and clear them out and move through these lands, doing various side quests in an in-depth story-driven campaign that will be a linear narrative story. You see, a lot of the times when you look at a game like this, the first thought is this open world? No, I think that's the first thing to nip in the bud. This is going to be a linear story that's going to take you through a campaign set by the developers. Most of the missions are going to be more or less corridors. Not necessarily in a bad way, but it means that you will be focused on gaining certain objectives to try and find out the lore of this world. Whether it's through stealth, survival, or of course, more brutal combat. And this combat is the thing that I really want to talk about. As someone that has a whole channel that's based on medieval games, God, that's the saddest thing I've ever said. Trust me, I know a good sword fight when I see one. And especially when you actually realize that the sword physics is based on the way your mouse moves, then you really start to realize that you're not going to be able to play this for longer than 10 minutes before you want to put your head in a toilet bowl. This is a game that I played so much of back in the day. I mean, this is me and my 50 other only friends playing a huge clan battle, and my god was it a lot of fun. But the main reason that Mordhau did so well is because of the intricacy and the effort that was put into the mechanics of the combat. Whether it was the directional sword fighting that tried to advance on something like a chivalry back in the day, ducking and weaving, being able to jump over blows, getting the perfect timing for a chamber as they would come in for the attack doing the same thing. And because everybody wants to sweat this thing, there were some incredibly good Mordhau players. Me not being one of them. Oh, yeah, that was pretty cool. Oh, you got it. You did show him there, son. You showed him. But it's whether you can actually put something like this into a story-driven campaign, because it hasn't really been done, at least in this fast-paced action. But there is another way of doing it. You see, Mordhau's combat, along with Chivalry 2, who have very similar bases in the mechanics, are able to have this fast-paced, slick sword fighting. But there's another game that slows it down a little bit, that maybe is something more along the lines of what we could see in Blight. Okay, well, I was going to put on a background video to show off this, but I've actually put on my mass murder video where I basically go around a monastery in Kingdom Come just killing monks. Something feels a bit wrong about that. Oh man. Oh, that's a shame. Yet it's Kingdom Come Deliverance that really took this intricate combat system into a single player game, that tried to push away all this notion of it has to be a competitive title, and now you can do it in a single player world. Don't get me wrong, this is an open world medieval game, not like Blight, but having something a little bit similar with that directional combat is going to be paramount to making Blight a successful medieval simulator. And unfortunately, we do not know how that's going to pan out, because this vertical slice that we saw of Blight Survival very much didn't focus on the combat. It looked like it was plenty of cutscene animations, I mean, even rugby tackling zombies and giving them a swift blow to the chops with your shield. But they have said that this is something they're going to be focusing on a little bit later, so hopefully we'll see some expansions on their combat system. In terms of the gameplay itself, they did very much say that what you can see of this guy in full plate armor sneaking around was just a way of indicating some of the stealth sections within the title, because that probably wouldn't seem all that realistic, and they did acknowledge that, saying most of the time you're not going to be sneaking around in full plate armor, but you will be moving through these linear levels, deciding whether you want to go all out and loud, chopping up people, or going around the back and doing some of these slick takedowns, because you will be able to have stealth takedowns, whether it is within a cutscene or this new combat system that they're teasing. And it is the way they introduce these medieval mechanics into a more linear approach that I'd be interested to see how it works, because they are focusing very much on their story. The Steam page itself is all story, talking about this no man's land between two desperate kingdoms in a ceaseless war, a purgatory with a new strain of blight that's erupted from the remains of the fallen. It is your job to venture forth and vanquish all-consuming blight, being this medieval version of a COVID response unit. Yet you might notice some of this game feels a little bit similar to what Tarkov was, jumping into arenas, moving through little missions and having side quests, gaining this loot and taking it back to a centralized base. You can then use that to improve your character and, of course, your friends along the way, being able to collect resources and upgrade your armor, your weapons, and your skills, so going into it next time you're going to have a much better advantage and an idea of how each mission works. And definitely through some of the gameplay, it seems like Tarkov is not a really far off comparison. Through the Henir Studio official Twitter, we've also seen some behind the scenes. The combat system is starting to be revealed, and it definitely looks, whilst it isn't going in depth of a first-person Kingdom Come Deliverance, that directional combat will be there. Slicing from right to left, stabbing, and of course being able to block, strafe, and move out the way of certain enemies. The stealth system has also been revealed and improved upon with stealth takedowns, that thus not to notify some of the enemies when you're moving through certain missions. And of course you can do some parkour. Now, whether they lean into realism within this game is always a big question, because as much as I, for one, do love this genre of game, I'm not quite as hardcore as some people, who think everything has to be incredibly realistic as soon as it's set within a period setting. And being able to do forward rolls and vaulting over fences in full plate armor, I wouldn't say is the most realistic thing, although this video disagrees with that. But as much as us basement-dwelling nerds can argue whether this game should focus on historical accuracy or the story in this admittedly fantasy world anyway, it's proven that the attention has been warranted. Not only has this game been reacted to every streamer under the sun, but it seems that funding is on its way. They gained an Epic Game Store grant, which I think was part of them being on Unreal Engine. They now have thousands and thousands of pounds in order to make this game, meaning that hopefully what once was from a hobby project could now be a full-time career. Oh, and there's one small extra tidbit. It is now in the top 15 most wishlisted games on Steam. A game made by 2 people. So it's safe to say there might be some success on the horizon. And I think it is okay to be excited by titles like this every now and then, because what else am I going to do with my life? Go outside.